Welcome to Roadmap to Joy. I'm Ginger. I'm coming to you from Arizona. I'm a parent, and with me today is my counterpart, Jake.
That's right. I'm Jake Sparks. I am the Embark treatment director. I've been working with clients and they're mostly adolescents and their families for about 12 years now, and really excited to be here.
Being a parent, today I'm really excited about this topic. We're going to be talking about back to school anxiety. So I'm super excited to talk with you about this today.
Yeah, it is back to school anxiety season,
Yeah.
which is not the most magical time of the year for students, and therefore it's not the most magical time of the year for their parents either.
Yeah.
Very stressful for families. 31.9% of all school age kids have some form of anxiety. 2 to 5% of those, that anxiety manifests as some form of school refusal. It really is fairly common,
hmm
and it's something that we need to be aware of and understand the warning signs. So we, as parents, we know how to help our kids, and as teachers or mental health professionals, we are able to see it meet that need.
So when you say school refusal, like what would that look like in my daughter?
Yeah, how old's your daughter?
Well, she's in her 20s. She's 20 right now.
So, so the funny thing is, so as we talk, I always like to talk about small children, because for some reason, as parents, it's really easy to have empathy for a small child.
Yeah.
And the smaller the child, easier the empathy is. When they get to look more like adults, it's easier to stop having as much empathy for them.
hmm
So when you ask about what does school refusal usually look like, it can be a handful of things. So sometimes it's just outright refusal. I'm not going. I'm not getting in the car. You can't make me go. Well, this is like the quintessential adolescent version.
Yeah.
I don't know if you still make her go to school right now.
No, that's her choice.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so some more subtle types that we don't often see is clients with school anxiety, or students with school anxiety will show up and they have a really difficult time paying attention. They have a really difficult time concentrating. Maybe they fall asleep. Maybe they go to school and they can hold it together, and then they get home and their whole world just melts down. I have a 6-year-old who's in
Mm,
first grade,
yeah.
and her teacher's like, she's such a great student and she's so well behaved. But the second she walks in that door after school, it's like all hell's broken loose sometimes. So it can look different based on age. But what is important for people to realize is where that anxiety is coming from and what's happening physiologically. And when we say school anxiety, it's not necessarily like there's no like diagnosis. This is school anxiety. And school anxiety is not necessarily different than like home anxiety, or I don't want to go to grandma's house, so I have grandma's house anxiety. Does that make sense? It's not
Yeah.
like a specific thing. Really, what we talk about with school anxiety is this lump of emotions and feelings and difficulty that just feels so yucky inside. And so we just couch that all together as anxiety. But really, there's so much more happening underneath the surface.
hmm What are some of those reasons that that would be happening?
Yeah, great question. And that's the right question to be asking, is what's actually going on.
hmm
Whenever I have a parent that's bringing their adolescent to me for therapy and they say school refusal, I'll ask a parent, "Well, why are you bringing them in?" And 99 times out of 100, I hear things like, "Well, they're refusing to go to school, they won't do their homework, they're skipping classes, they're oppositional, they're defiant to their teachers."
Mm.
And they start listing all these things. But if you notice about that list, all of those are behaviors. They're all just things
Oh
that
yeah.
the student or the child is doing, and the parent is like, I don't want you doing those things. So essentially, they're saying, where's the off button on my kid?
Yeah.
Can I flip it to easy mode? And that's really what they want to do. Is like, oh, there's dysfunction, malfunctioning. Can we just flip it to functioning? And that's what they want. But what parents are not realizing is now if you were to Google school anxiety, what you'll get is a list of tips and techniques and strategies that can help your kid. However, they're almost always going to be wrong and almost always going to make the situation worse.
And what do you mean by that? Like wrong?
Yeah, so what we have to understand is our the more the research, the more we learn, the more we're seeing this. We talk about the brain body connection.
hmm
And we used to talk about them as separate, like I have my body and I have my brain. Well, now we realize that our brains actually exist inside of our bodies, right?
Yeah.
Now, the separation comes if I get an appendicitis, no amount of mental willpower or psychological energy is going to resolve that appendicitis, right? I need a
Right.
medical intervention. But what parents and even adolescents themselves or young children don't realize is all of the ways that their body is actually priming them for the anxiety. This comes out of decades of research from Bruce Perry, uh, Stephen Porges, Lisa Feldman Barrett. You can Google all those names, Dan Siegel. What we're learning is about how your body's nervous system responds to stress. So you here in this room, you have what's called a neuroreceptivity. Have you ever heard that term before?
No.
It's a new one. Jot it down. Neuroreceptivity, which is this idea that consciously or subconsciously, your body is able to identify and respond to threats. Okay.
Okay.
Someone doesn't have to tell you.
Yeah.
You just can feel it. So if I sit here and I start getting really weird or awkward, or like you're gonna be like, "What's Jake doing?" Like you'll feel my threat,
Yeah.
and you'll start having this anxiety
Yeah. Yeah.
thing that occurs. You're like, "Yes, I'm having it now." Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. That totally makes sense.
So think about a brand new baby.
Uh-huh.
There's no amount of like logic or reasoning or explanation you can give to a baby. The only way a baby learns about its environment is through all of these sensory inputs. How does it feel in here? How does it sound? What am I seeing? All of those things. And none of those are factual words cognition, right? It just has to use its what it actually is its central nervous system and these other nervous systems to interpret what's happening.
Mm.
And when all of these nervous systems, when things are online and they're safe and they're good, we we say that body's fully integrated. They're able to use their resources. Well, problems can arise, particularly with an anxiety, when our body's responding to these threats, maybe even below our consciousness, and it's putting us in this activated state. So like panic, flight or fight mode. So if you think of a kid who's refusing to go to school, it's not that they have a bad attitude and they're just too lazy, or it's none of that. That actually refusing to go to school is actually a very healthy adaptive response to panic and fear and stress. Right? So if your body, your central nervous system is activated and you're in this constant state of you better fight for your life, that's no time to go sit in math class. That's this stimulus is hurtful and scary and I need to avoid it. So what parents sometimes do is they force their kid to go sit in that dangerous environment. It's not actually dangerous, but to the client, to the student, it can feel that way. It can feel shocking and scary. Or they'll give them tips or tricks or say, well, you're just too lazy. You need to work harder. They'll start doing all of these things. But what they're not doing is recognizing physiologically what's happening for their child. And so it's this total mismatch where we're trying to actually, your body's working excellently. That's when there's an alarm, you're supposed to have these warning signs. The warning signs are, helpful, good things. They're just overactive. They're just responding to things that aren't actually dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there anything else in school you are aware of, like, that would be stressful for my child that we should be aware of?
Some of the literature they talk about these body budgets. Okay, have you ever heard that term, a body
No.
budget? So what this is this relationship between all the things that are stressing you out is like a negative, like a withdrawal, and then all of the things that help bolster you up is like a deposit. Okay,
Okay.
so things are going good and some things are going bad. And in theory, if you're like in the plus side, you got money in the bank, you're going to be regulated. You'll be able to better adapt to life's stresses. Does that make sense? You're like on good ground. It's when
Yeah.
you get into the negative,
hmm
there's too much, the stress is, or the environment is too stressful. It has now exceeded your ability to cope. So now you're in the negative. And that's what they say your body budget's negative. What school becomes particularly hard, especially for an adolescent, is because there's so many various stressors. Okay, so academically, it's like my full-time job. I got to show up and I got to get good grades and I don't quite understand this material. So those are all withdrawals.
hmm
And then I got to deal with my peers, my friends,
Yeah.
and my all the normal social interactions of being an adolescent. Those are all withdrawals, withdrawals, withdrawals.
Yeah.
And then I gotta just sit and focus in a class all day when actually developmentally it might be more appropriate for me to be out running and exercising
Mm.
or doing these creativity, all these other outlets that maybe me. So those are all withdrawals, withdrawals, withdrawals. Does that make sense? There's
Yeah.
all these small little things, and if those are not met with deposits, then the stressors are going to exceed their ability to cope. And that's why if you Google like tips to help my teen better manage their anxiety, most people get it wrong because if I go to my 6-year-old and she's really stressed about school and she's refusing to get out of the car and having these meltdowns, and I'm like, "Ah, you just need to do some breathing exercises.
Yeah.
Why don't you just breathe better?
Yeah.
Is that going to be a deposit? No, that's just one more expectation that she can't measure up to.
Yeah, yeah.
And then maybe if I'm really dysregulated parent, I might say, "Oh, you're just too lazy. You just don't want it enough." In my day, we did. Does that make sense? So we're
Yeah.
just continuing to make those withdrawals.
Yeah, so you're talking about withdrawal so much. So as a parent, what should I be doing then correctly that would actually make a deposit that would make a difference to like relieve some of this anxiety?
Yeah. So the best well-intentioned parents sometimes have the hardest time with this
Hmm.
because they want their kid to be successful because they care so much and they know what's at stake. So what they struggle with is seeing their child's behaviors appropriately. So what I mean by that is we always talk about behaviors are like the fire alarm,
Mm.
not the fire.
Gotcha.
So, and that can be really hard. I've worked with a family where, like, yeah, my 15-year-old, I say, hey, get to school, and they say, F you, I'm never doing what you want me to do. That feels like a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying, no, that's actually not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is their nervous system is so escalated, so activated, they can't tolerate school. Your daughter saying, leave me alone, I don't want to go to school, actually makes sense in the context of what's happening physiologically with. So what we need to do is understand on a nervous system level what's actually happening organically for her, and then we can attune to that. We always talk about the pyramid, or not the pyramid, the iceberg. So the behavior is just the tip of the iceberg, and that's the thing that we can see, and that's the thing we want to intervene on, like stop that
Yeah.
or build that up. But really, we need to pay attention to all this stuff happening below the surface. So really, your question is, what can parents do?
Yeah.
It should be, well, how do we? The appropriate question is, how do we use that behavior to recognize when something's going wrong
Right.
on a neurobiological nervous system level? And how do I, as a parent, meet them and resolve that issue?
Mm.
And that's a process we call co-regulation. Um, and co-regulation is all about if I have, again, we empathize really easy with small children, and I have small children at home.
Yeah.
So it's easy. So if I have this 6-year-old that's really panicked about school, and her nervous system's just fired. She's in flight or fight mode. There's no blood going to her frontal cortex, so logic is out the window. Reasoning is out the window. Cause and effect is out the window. So there's no amount of, if you get in the car, I'll give you a cookie when you get home. That does not work,
Gotcha.
right? Because that's like thinking and logic and reasoning. If I say, if you don't go to school, you won't get into a good college, that has no meaning to her because
Hmm.
that's, again, logic and reasoning and future. I need to respond. So that co-regulation is me coming in, sitting by her, and letting my dysregulated 6-year-old utilize my centered,
Hmm.
structured nervous system
Wow.
that's intact.
Mm-hmm.
So she's literally borrowing my healthy, centered, emotionally regulated brain.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
there's
sitting with them, it's as simple as that sometimes.
Yeah, it's not about the doing, it's about sitting and connecting and being there. And there's 3 examples that I always bring up because parents, especially great, well-intentioned parents, they wanna do something. They wanna nip that behavior in the bud, right? So 3 examples I always bring up is that co-regulation is bidirectional. So communication's happening both ways.
Mm.
So one example I bring up, if you have a newborn baby and a mother who's nursing, somehow that mother's body is producing milk that is custom tailored to meet that needs of that baby, both in terms of quantity and nutrition value, right? Like there's something about the baby and the mom, there's this like invisible interaction that they're having and they can just sync up. Another example, they did a study that said newborns learn to cry at the exact frequency their parents find most annoying. Right?
Yeah, that is true.
Like, oh yeah, going to make sense because
Yeah,
like I really need my caregiver to respond to me,
yeah,
so I'm gonna find that right
yeah.
pitch.
Uh-huh.
So by the parents responding, like there's this really great sync up that happens. A third example, there is I don't want to butcher the details, but they gave these young children, 3, 4, 5 years old, put them in a room with a really complicated puzzle, and it was kind of impossible to solve. And they wanted to see how resilient the kids could be. And then they brought a caregiver in, the parent usually, and said, "Don't do anything, don't help them with the puzzle, don't really interact, just be there." And they found that those small age children could stay with the task 3 to 4 times longer, 3 to 4 times more resilient, just with a safe caregiver sitting next to them.
Wow.
Didn't have to say or do anything, just being there. So I always tell families, like, your presence, it's like Bluetooth. Like, you just sync up to each other, and and so that's really what co-regulation is about, is just sitting there. Um, it's not, you don't just sit there, but it's a process of letting that child utilize your internal resources.
Wow, that's amazing.
Um, and then as you build these co-regulatory process, that's the avenue for self-regulation, right? That's ultimately where we want to go.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to me, just your presence alone, what a power that is.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The trick to that is it it only works if you can be present,
Not
right?
distracted?
Not distracted
Yeah.
and not so we talk about the, the child might be flipping her lid. And we actually use, you'll see us do this a lot. Have you seen this?
Mm-mm.
So this is actually a great model for your brain. So if you hold up your hand here,
Mhm.
um, this is, this is like your brain stem. Okay. And what's so important to learn is that it grows from the bottom up.
Mhm.
Okay. So here's your brain stem. And if you take your thumb here, this midsection is your midbrain, and this is your amygdala. And this is where all your emotion comes from. So brainstem is like, make sure your heart's beating, make sure your lungs work. And then on top of that is build the hardware for emotion. And then on top of that is your top of your brain is logic, reasoning, all of this more advanced kind of thinking.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When we get dysregulated, literally the blood stops flowing to the top of our brain. So it comes offline and it becomes disconnected.
Mhm.
And now we're just acting on pure emotion.
Ah, yeah.
So when a caregiver is regulated, they can come down and they can just be present because I'm regulated. But if I, as a parent, am not regulated, if my toddler is driving me nuts and I'm in a rage because they've been screaming for 30 minutes about how the blue popsicle's too blue and they wanted the red one or whatever, you know what I mean? And I'm all of a sudden now I'm flipped. My ability to be a co-regulating force
Mhm.
is
So that's what it means about being present.
yeah, you have to find a way to be regulated yourself.
Makes sense.
If you're my mom, I can't borrow your working nervous system if yours is offline too.
Yeah.
We're
Because
gonna
that
have to go find someone else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And your point is because they'll if I'm dysregulated, they're gonna probably borrow that dysregulation. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's yes, exactly. And that's actually what we see happen. There are within our brain these what are called mirror neurons. So just like our nervous system can respond to threats, if you're in a room and someone walks in, everyone just looks over at who's walking in that room. Like we just respond to all these, "Oh, this is happening. This is new."
Mhm.
We just absorb that. Same thing with mirror neurons. I can walk home at night and walk in the front door after work, and the energy that I bring into the room will greatly influence how my kids respond to me.
Mm.
So we can use that for our advantage, and when we're not intentional, we'll be using it for our disadvantage.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. So thinking back to my daughter when she was younger, these milestones when she would transition from like primary school to middle school. And like as a parent, how can I support like these big like transitions
Yeah,
in
right.
life for like from an anxiety perspective?
Yeah, great. So recognize, especially the smaller the kid, the easier, the more there are those we called about those disruptors, those withdrawals. Okay, so a big change in school, change in teacher, change in structure. If you move and have to go to a new school, those are all really small or maybe even big withdrawals. So what that means is the deposits will have to be able to mitigate the withdrawals. Okay. So some helpful things is when your child is in a regulated state. So a couple weeks beforehand, or you should start talking and prepping and saying, "Hey, this is going to happen. This will be tough, and here's how we'll mitigate." Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
we'll try to help and coach and prepare emotionally for that, knowing that there'll be some withdrawals. There are also lots of things that can be done to, depending on the age of the kid. If I had a small, like going to kindergarten or first grade, I might say, "I'm gonna walk you to your teacher's door, and I'm gonna be with you and your teacher, and we're gonna spend 3 minutes in a soft, calm place. I'll take your hand. At the end of it, your teacher will take your hand, and we'll just make that transition nice and soft."
So you're painting a picture almost ahead of time? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're painting what we're trying to do is really we're mitigating the withdrawals and amplifying the deposit. So if I know, hey, she's got to go to a new school, this is going to be a big withdrawal. I need to be able to afford that withdrawal. So what can I do to help build in deposits?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a lot of schools do this now. Before your first day of first grade, come tour the school, come meet your teacher, come go through all those things. So when you get there to do it live in person for the first time, it's not as big of a withdrawal.
What are the best questions as a parent that I could ask, like my daughter, just around anxiety and any stressors that she's having at school? Just how can I like dig into that so that I support her the best way?
Yeah. So the first thing I always say, so the behaviors that we see are really valuable indicators. Okay. So I would first want to be really aware of, is she going to bed on time? Is she waking up? How will I know if she comes home from school and she runs into her room and doesn't come out for 2 hours? I'm like, oh, that's not like her. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I might look for these behaviors to start to tell me,
I should
is
be
this,
more curious. Or
yeah, I should be more curious. I should not be. If there's things that aren't specifically concerning to you, you're just wanting to know. We're always encouraged to find age appropriate ways to ask and talk. So, for again, my 6-year-old, if I just say, "How was your day?" She's gonna say, "Good," because her day was this huge giant thing,
hmm
and she doesn't even know how to break that down. But if I say, "Who was the person, or what was the person sitting next to you eating for lunch?"
hmm
She'll be like, "Oh, I sat next to so and so, and he had this hot bologna sandwich," or whatever it was, right? So then if I give her that, she can talk. Now, if I have a 16-year-old,
hmm
that would probably not be
Yeah,
the right question.
yeah.
But I would still look for those behaviors and look for, how is our body budget doing? Is there enough deposits to mitigate all of the withdrawals?
So, like for high school age, is there anything that you recommend to make those deposits and engage those
Yeah.
conversations with our high schoolers?
Yeah, regular experience all comes back to that co-regulation process. Because what we need to remember is that stress is actually great. Kids
Mm,
need stress.
really?
Yeah, I know. You're like, I must be doing awesome then, because I have plenty of stress.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is great. That's how we learn, and that's how we grow. So think about, if you want to like get stronger, the only real, like, physically,
hmm
like I want to be a better runner, or I want to climb a mountain or whatever. The only way to do it is to do this exercise, which is going to stress out your body.
Mm.
Even on a cellular level, we know there's a process called hormesis, or we talk about hormetic effects of a specific protocol or exercise, which is stressing out your body for short periods of time for the purpose of making them stronger.
Mm.
Uh, so stress is actually really good.
Hmm.
We should encourage stress. If we're not in some level of stress, we're probably not growing. Now, most of us, we don't have the problem of not enough stress. Most of us, just normal everyday life and expectation. But we do see this sometimes with kids. If they've not had the appropriate stressors, they might be developmentally behind because they haven't been. If I take my brand new baby and I never let her touch the floor, she's never going to learn to sit up or crawl or walk, right? If I just
Yeah.
always hold her and carry her everywhere, she needs the stress of sitting on her belly and trying to find her way to push up so she can learn to crawl. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So where it becomes a problem is when our level of stress exceeds our ability to cope.
Mm.
So as a parent, that's what we need to be looking for, is this an appropriate, and is this an appropriate level of stress, and they're coping. And the thing I always talk about again is that co-regulation. If I have a kid, or if my daughter comes home and um, is stressed, and she's telling me she's stressed, but we come home and we sit together and we can have this co-regulatory process, and I know that we're co-regulating, then I feel like, yeah, we're actually meeting that level of stress. It's when I'm not seeing indicators of co-regulation, like she can't co-regulate. Her lid's way too flipped. That means we're now exceeding, um, we're exceeding the level of stress that she. That's where it
Gotcha.
becomes a problem.
Gotcha. So, how can I encourage my daughter to go to school, be involved in school without like increasing her anxiety around school? Does that make sense?
Uh huh. Yeah, like if you were just like, you gotta go and be there, and
Yeah, but not amp up that anxiety.
yeah, or not, like, how do you not put all the pressure on?
Yeah.
I always believe that kids do well when they can. Okay. So, what I mean by that is, I think this of all humans too, when we have the option to choose to, for health and healing and growth, that's what we choose. So, most kids want, they don't love doing homework and they don't love being in class all day. I get all those bummer things, but they have this inherent sense of growth. I do want to get better. I want to be a human. I want to be a responsible adult. And depending on what developmental they are, or how developmentally advanced they are, or delayed they are for their age, that will come and go. In theory, shouldn't be a parent's job to constantly nudge their kid to go to school, right? There's some level of they're um, left to their own devices. We want them to make healthy decisions on their own, not because their moms or their dads waving a finger at them. Now, all kids will need some help and some reminders, and to have a structure built in. Did you do your homework? Not most kids don't like rush home to. I can't wait. I'm a self actualized human. I can't wait to do all my homework the second I
Right.
get home. Most of us are not that way,
Right.
and that's okay. So, as long as we can again come back to experiences of co-regulation prior to the discussion. So parents, if you Google online, it'll be like, talk to your kids. But if your kid's lid is flipped and their nervous system's freaking out and they're in flight or fight mode, and you're like, hey, go to school, or let's do this, or let's talk about it, you're just gonna freak them out more. So talking is great once they're here, and
Okay.
once you're both here, then you can sit and talk. Like, how is it going? What is going on?
Hmm.
What help do you need? So I realize we haven't said this, so one of the questions that I get asked a lot is, okay, co-regulation, I get that, anxieties, all this physical stuff. How do I know if I'm co-regulating? Like, how do I know if that process is working?
Right.
So, there are 5 things to look for.
Okay.
5 indicators that your nervous system is helping manage your child's nervous system. So the first one is proximity. Can you get close? Can you sit by them?
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay.
or if you're like, hey, come here, and they like run away, or like they want to be left alone, like don't even get close to me. That's a sign their lid's flipped. But if they allow you to get close. Second one, safe touch. Yeah, are they okay with a touch on the arm? If you put their arm and they like wiggle away, there's a lot of shame happening. A lot of this. They're not co-regulating. Can they make eye contact? If they won't look at you, their head's up or they're all over, they're distressed.
Hmm.
Um, we say congruency of affect, meaning does their face match their voice? So if you ask, "Hey, how's it going?" "I'm fine. Everything's going great." Like,
Right.
okay, is it really though?
Yeah.
Or vice versa, we see this a lot of like, "How was your day?" "Oh, it was only the worst day I've ever had in my whole life." Like, okay." Like that's a pretty good indicator they're flipped. And then the last one we look for is, are they receptive to empathy? So when you express empathy to them, um, like, tell me about it. That sounds so hard. If I'm you, I'd feel so abandoned or so alone, or I can't believe your friends did. When you express empathy, can they receive that and soak into it? Or are they like, well, you don't know me, you don't care? That's a pretty good sign that they're dysregulated. So I wouldn't try to do any poking or prodding or why don't you go to school or what's going on here until I know I have those 5 markers of regulation.
Mm.
Because again, there's the iceberg and there's all that stuff underneath it and all this body stuff's going on, and we can't just peek at the iceberg and start chipping away at the top without understanding what's happening underneath.
Mm. Got it.
Just as the brain develops from the bottom up, our interventions have to be developed from the bottom up. And if none of this is online, your logic and reasoning, all of that's not connected, no amount of talk and logic and reasoning is really going to get to the issue.
Hmm.
And What it actually does is it makes it worse because when we have a misattuned approach, if I tell my daughter,
Yeah.
"Hey, why aren't you going to school? You should be doing this. Don't you know that if you don't go to class, you're gonna not get into college?" And her lid is flipped.
Mhm.
That's a total misattunement. I'm giving her logic and reasoning when she needs emotional support. And what I am actually doing is creating an experience of shame for her.
Oh, yeah.
So that could potentially will provide her an opportunity to incorporate more shame into her schema,
Hmm.
into herself.
Wow.
Uh, Conversely, when you can meet someone and co-regulate, that is actually an antidote to shame. Okay. Um, so I always encourage parents to be careful. And when they Google, it's like, it'll give you all the tips and tricks. Have your child do breathing exercises and this and this. And those are fine once we have the co regulation,
Mm,
once we know their nervous system's on board.
gotcha.
Then we can start employing all those strategies.
So, at what point should I be concerned about, my child and school around school anxiety and really get, maybe some help from the school or from the teacher or, engage people outside of just me, the parents?
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't think it's ever, I think you can always keep those options open and those lines of communication. So even if I have a seemingly healthy, happy, normal, love school, no school issues, I would still want to have some connection to her teachers and to those resources. You
Just
know?
communicating, letting them know,
Yeah.
seeing what they're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And then when something does happen, we're not so reactive. Like, oh crap, what happened? Now I got to. So you're asked though, what behaviors would I start to see that I'm like, okay, maybe I need to do more or beyond. So, again, the behaviors are the warning sign that something's going on. So if we start to see the warning signs, start to hear the fire alarm, absolutely, that's a sign that we should be doing something. So again, some of the warning signs would be if I saw my child come home and if they can if they can talk to me about I feel stressed, overwhelmed, I'm not getting these things done. I see major behavior changes, isolating in their room when they weren't before. They're spending a lot more time out of the house when they weren't before, or they're spending a lot more time in the house when they weren't before. They're not going out and being with their friends. So those major behavior changes would be concerning for me. The other great thing about many adolescents is that it's usually not domain specific. Like I don't want to go to football practice anymore. Like if relationships at school are tough, they're probably also tough at church or at, yeah, football camp or what does that make sense? Or
Yeah.
so you're gonna see this kind of more global change in their thinking, and the way they're acting. If it's not global, it's like I feel great, but you hear them complain about their math teacher every day. They seem to be doing well, but what's going on in the math class? Let's see if we can target that. That might lead me to.
Do you think I need to get specific with any accommodations that the school, the teachers that that I should request if I see a lot of anxiety or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so certainly, our approach, we'd always want to we always say meet the client where they are, meet the student where they are. So we talk we talk about stress is good. Too much is not good.
Right.
So I always tell parents, yeah, we want to accommodate, but we don't want to over accommodate, right? So when again, we have empathy for babies, so I always use them. When if you have a baby that likes to be held, but you never put them down and never let them go through the discomfort, then they never learn to walk. So we have to brush up against that challenge, right? So I would not ever want to accommodate all things away. So some parents have said they really don't like going to school, so I'm just going to pull them out and homeschool. And maybe that's what each kid needs, or maybe that's what this one kid needs, but that's can be dangerous because now you've just removed the the stress for them to work on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They they need something to brush up against so they can be in that growth zone. So there's your comfort zone, growth zone, and then we say like the oh crap, like panic zone.
Mhm.
So we want to find ways to help them be in that growth zone. So accommodations can be helpful depending on the underlying some of the underlying issues. One thing that we haven't talked about is some of the specific reasons why someone's might be dysregulated.
Mhm.
So this is really where your accommodations question gets interesting because if I have like a maybe I have a learning disorder, dyslexia. So certain classes are really difficult for me, and those are big withdrawals.
So I might need some specific supports to manage my dyslexia or another learning disorder.
We should understand that the co-regulation and the body, nervous system, all that still is in play, but we need to make sure we are understanding why those are stressing them, like what those stressors or withdrawals actually are, so that we can be targeted in our accommodation
Gotcha.
versus just a blanket accommodation.
When should I consider seeking like therapy for my son or daughter regarding school anxiety? At what point do you think I should really, go to that outside help to a therapist?
So I'm of the belief that most of us could benefit from some therapy
Mhm.
from time to
Totally.
time.
Yes.
I guess I'm biased as as a therapist. So particularly when we see um, the level of stress overwhelming their ability to cope. Okay, so we're continuing to see the same stressful behaviors, and then even once we've done some really basic accommodations, and we're still seeing that level of stress, it tells me that we probably need some outside help to mitigate the withdrawals, mitigate the stressors, and then to amplify and build the supports.
And what would that look like in my son or daughter? Like, can you give me some like specific examples of what that could look like?
In terms of therapy, what?
No, in terms of like what I should be looking for, behavior wise, in order to seek, like a therapist or an outside help for them. Does that make sense? Like specific, maybe behaviors, symptoms, if you will, that
Yeah.
I would be seeing that I really should be like, maybe I need more help than just what I can provide.
Yeah. Well, certainly, if we're starting to see more global mental health concerns. So it's not just, yeah, they're anxious about school, but they're also having a lot of depression symptoms. They also have some global anxiety. Maybe they're deal with a lot of separation anxiety. My 15-year-old should want to go out with her friends, but it's hard for her to leave my side as a parent. That does that make sense? So we
Yeah.
would start to look for those other big things. If there's ever instances of uh, self harm, suicidal thoughts, suicidal actions, those certainly would be red flags. That this is not just school anxiety. There's a lot more mental health going. The other thing I would say is as a family, what is your ability to provide co-regulatory experiences? And a lot of our families, we talk about this, and I'll ask, like, when's the last time you two felt you could co-regulate together? And I've seen this where mom or dad just break down in tears and say, the last time I held you, like the last time you were small enough to hold in my arms.
No.
And that's um, sometimes we need a therapist or we need someone else to how do we get our relationship back
Mm,
where parents aren't a liability, they can actually be the emotional asset they need to be, and sometimes that requires a lot of therapy and communication, and more often than not it's helping parents, because most of us, everything I'm saying, most of us were not raised this way,
right.
right? This is guess that somewhere between 30 and 67% of anxiety is hereditable, meaning it's like passed on generationally. But in the study, you can actually read it and says it's really hard though to separate. Is it that the parents are not able to provide co-regulation because they themselves aren't co-regulated, right? So it's not actually, is it purely genetic or is there all this environmental stuff? So you ask about therapy, I would, when I say, when's the last time you were able to co-regulate? And then I'll ask the parents, when's the last time you yourself could co-regulate?
Wow.
Just with each other or with someone else in your life, and I'm like, "Oh, actually, kinda always, like, my lid's always kinda flipped," or maybe I'm, like, hanging
Uh,
on with 2,
yeah.
and it's like, "Ping, ping," and it's, like, falling off. So those certainly would be instances where I would want someone in therapy. If you're saying, "We're able to co-regulate, we have that, and we're making some accommodations, and we're seeing some growth, and we're able to manage the stressors, and the risks are low," like, we're not talking about self-harm, we're not talking about suicidality, like, we're just stumbling, kind of going through it, um, that's a good time to involve your support system,
Gotcha.
everyone that you have.
Gotcha. So when I'm looking for a therapist for my son or daughter, um, around school anxiety or anything in life, is there any tips you have on how to find like the best therapist for my son or daughter?
Yeah, absolutely. So, certainly we at Embark have a lot of resources. So if we can help connect families to appropriate resources that meet their needs. We don't want to over intervene and we don't want to under intervene. I would also always encourage students to students and families to reach out to their local support network. So Your high school has counselors. They have resources for people local in your area to get you connected to. You can also, uh, I mean, look at the back of your insurance card. There's lots of ways to find the people. What we want to make sure is you can have uh, a therapist that can help provide that safety and security relationally, a therapist that can understand the goal isn't to turn off the fire alarm, right? So the behaviors are the fire alarm. We don't want someone that just turns off the fire alarm while the underground fire is still burning. So we got to need to make sure we can really get to physiologically what's happening so that they're able to manage. They have enough deposits to manage all the withdrawals.
Are there any resources that you can recommend, for me as a parent, when it comes to, just managing school anxiety or anything that I should be up to speed on with resources that can support my son or daughter?
Yeah, of course. So again, similar. So local agencies, um, your high school or other local health centers will have tips and things. Us at Embark, a, we can provide a lot of help and a lot of support for a wide continuum of presenting issues and problems, and then all over the country. One book I always recommend is called Brain Body Parenting by Mona Delahook, um, who is a psychologist that talks a lot about what we've talked about today. Done a lot of work again with the last 2 decades of research around how our body creates and drives our emotion, and how we can mitigate our body sensations to drive our mental health.
Is there any resources that you can recommend for my teenager specifically, like books, websites, anything for that's geared more for them that would be helpful?
Their biggest resource is going to be the people in their lives.
Mm,
So, do they have coaches, uh, church leaders, parents, neighbors, all of those other people? If they want to do some more research around specific health issues or diagnoses or mental health concerns, I would encourage them or their parent to reach out to us here at Embark, and we can connect them to resources local in their area. Anxiety becomes such a just a catch-all for everything. Like,
yeah.
I don't wanna experience it. Feels so yucky, and so I'm stressed, and I'm overwhelmed, I'm this, and what is important to remember is when we can find meaning and purpose
Mm,
in our struggles become easier to overcome. But we talk a lot about creating joy,
yeah.
and it's actually a great opportunity to have these stressors. Stress makes us healthier. It makes us stronger. Too much stress can be difficult, but when I work with clients and they can get to a point where they say, "My brain is really fast. It's really overreactive. My body's always heightened. I'm always ready for something bad to happen." But that's been an incredible opportunity to get to know myself,
Hmm,
and I'm gonna be a better student because of that. I'm going to be a better partner. I'm going to be a better parent because of my opportunity to get to know myself.
mm,
And I'm really excited for the next generation because there's a lot more of the youth of today that are doing this mental health work
yeah.
and knowing themselves better and finding joy and meaning and purpose in their difficulties, um, which I think is really tremendous. I want everyone to know if you're struggling with the anxiety, particularly around school, it's normal. You're not flawed or broken. Um,
So true.
be nice to yourself and make sure you're able to have people in your life that can be assets and help you and co-regulate with you to give you all the buffers that you need.
I love that. And is there any like quick tips, tricks you have for me as a parent or even, my teenager, my child to do to create joy? Is there any like easy ways, easy tips, tricks to create joy in our lives?
One of the issues when your life becomes so symptomatic, like I'm stressed and I'm anxious and I'm worried about stuff and I maybe doing like we just start running away from symptoms. Like that's our whole life. Just keep that at bay. Just keep that away. Um, and sometimes, well, what we always talk about is in order to find joy, it's that none of that's going to be joy. Even running away from it, even if all that was gone, that's still not joy. Joy is about having purpose and meaning in your life. And I'll talk with a lot of students around even though you're anxious, what are you passionate about? And they'll say like, "Well, I used to be really into astronomy,
Yeah.
but since my anxiety, I can't be." And I say, "Well, why can't you be anxious and an astronomer?"
Mhm.
Do you have to get rid of all those symptoms in order to do the things that you love? I'm like, oh, I don't know. Do I? And then we start talking about, well, I also want to be a great, I want to be a great aunt, to my nieces and nephews.
Mhm.
Okay, can you be anxious and a great aunt? Well, no. Okay, how come? Well, because I can't leave the house. Okay, so how can we get you to be a great aunt? What does that mean to you? And how do you get? And they're like, oh, actually, I can't. I can feel what I'm feeling and do what I want to do anyway. And kind of flipping that in their mind that I don't have to get rid of all these things I don't like about myself in order
Yeah.
to live the life I want to live. And actually, the more I just be who I want to be, regardless of my anxiety or my fears or my worries, the happier I am and the joy and meaning and purpose I have.
I love
Uh,
that.
the ultimate goal, we talk about co-regulation. The goal is to do self-regulation, right? So kids learn to co-regulate with a parent so they can be autonomous and launch into adulthood. But self-regulation is not the actual goal. The actual goal is that you then become a co-regulator for other people,
Mhm.
right? So that you can have friends and you can be that strong, solid base that other people can come and lean to when you're now the adult and you're now the parent and you have your own kids, they can come and co-regulate to you. That's the goal where we are able to serve and create meaning and purpose for the people that mean the most to us.
Yeah. Thank you, Jake. Thanks for joining us today
Yeah, thank
on
you.
the roadmap to joy and discussing back to school anxiety and tips and tricks as a parent that we can do to kind of navigate these challenges. I would encourage everybody to be sure to subscribe to our podcasts, and we appreciate you joining us today on this roadmap to joy. Thank you.